You don't have to stop talking. Just trying to learn this system, and so it looks like they're on. You can keep talking, just know that they're on. Thank you.
So we're ready to begin. So I'm going to call this meeting of the Planning Commission on November 12th at 4:30 to order. And the first thing is, are there any citizens that would like to be heard? We see none. I should say that all commissioners are here except Jerry Clace. The ex parte communications or disclosures that people have to make. None of those. By the way, all those commissioners who are here are in the room too. Approval of the minutes. Minutes from the October 29th. Give a second. Second, I think Mary was just slightly quicker. Any discussion of the minutes?
I'll just make a comment that I don't, just for staff, I don't know if that meeting if the recording made it onto YouTube. I just couldn't find it. So just
okay. Thank you. Yeah, we'll check.
Find it.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to take a vote. All in favor of passing the minutes? And any opposed? And there might be an abstention. Steve abstains. Trish, I think it's time for the county commission update.
This will be very quick. We had a county commission meeting on the 12th. There were 3 items that related to the planning commission. There's a CUP for 1146 Murphy Lane that was a daycare that passed unanimously. We had basically a lot line adjustment on lot 14 All American Acres regarding Bauer and DeFranchi and Brussels that passed unanimously. And then the final plat for Marshall Van Horn subdivision on Roberts Road passed unanimously. All of those were rural residential and they stayed above 1 acre. Is that it for me? Any questions for me?
This is all very quick. We have a next up is a public hearing. It's an update to the subdivision process, land use code, Article 8, decision-making bodies and officials, and Article 9, administration and procedures, as required by Senate Bill 174. So I'm going to open that hearing now. And we'll start with a staff report.
Thank you. Yeah, you have the, turns out somehow the wrong staff report got put in the packet. So I handed out the current staff report and we now have it loaded so I can share my screen and put it on your big screen as well. So let me get in there and just do that really fast if I can. And I will talk about it a little bit. And this is the same, we had a workshop on this on October 28th to review a lot of this. So it shouldn't be too brand new. You've seen a little bit of this before. So as we talked about during the workshop, this is came about as a Senate bill and House bill, Senate Bill 174 in 2023, and then also a House bill kind of reaffirmed it and changed a few things. But this is a mandatory requirement to update the processes to our subdivision ordinance, and it is specifically for residential subdivisions, and it's also specifically for single-family residential, duplex homes, and townhomes. So these new processes will not apply to commercial subdivisions or multi-family subdivisions. So this basically is requiring that we, the county, process subdivisions with a much firmer and quicker process than we have previously. And just to kind of sum it up, we're allowed so many review cycles to look at these subdivisions. So once a preliminary plat comes in for a subdivision, we have 4 cycles with which to look at it, request additional information or clarification, and issue an approval. So, and those cycles are each roughly 20 days. So if we do, if there's, so, and we can kind of choose where those 4 cycles lie. So the way it works is a preliminary application is turned in, which is just like a preliminary plat. So that comes in, if we review that and everything's fine, that's 1 cycle. If we review it and we need more information or it's unclear, we tell them we need more things. Something comes back, we issue something, that's 2 cycles. So we have 4 cycles to do the preliminary plat and the final plat. So, but it's at our discretion how many cycles each one takes. As far as we need more information or this is unclear or we can't, all those kinds of things. So that's basically the situation with this subdivision ordinance. The attorney's office has been helping us write the draft ordinance and the draft code. We did receive from the state, they offered an attorney to help us write the draft. So we took advantage of that. That was no charge. And then our attorney's office also has been working on it and trying to help us make it more clear and more understandable. So this is something that has to be adopted by the end of the year. So we're slightly under the gun on this one. So our hope is that we'll have the public hearing tonight and that you, the Planning Commission, will forward a recommendation to the County Commission. And we're hoping to get it on the County Commission meeting for a public hearing on December 3rd. And then they would have to make their decision probably at the following meeting on the 17th. So as we stated before in your workshop, the only thing at our discretion in this these new processes being mandated is we have to designate the land use authority for approval. So currently for final plats, the County Commission is the land use authority. The state is taking that away from the County Commission and mandating that it be basically one of 3 choices. It can be the zoning administrator of the planning department, it can be the planning commission, or it can be a mixed panel, which we honestly found a little confusing and cumbersome. So the attorney's office and the state attorney that works for the Utah Association of Counties recommended that it be the zoning administrator. So that's what we're proposing to this group. We can do 1 public hearing if we so choose. It is discretionary, and we've talked about let's either make that mandatory or discretionary. We find if we would ask 1 applicant to do it, but not another applicant, that we feel that opens us up to things we don't want to deal with. And so we've just removed the public hearing from this process. But that's also something that the Planning Commission could weigh in on if you feel that that's extremely important. But we staff and the attorney's office find that either we require that as one of these review cycles and one of these processes, or we don't. So so that's it in a nutshell. And I'm here to just answer questions if you have any on this review cycle. But the cycles, the length of time for the cycles, we cannot change. That's all mandated by the state. So as is the appeal process. So really what we're looking at is just an understanding of the process. If you have any questions, you can talk to us. We'll do the best we can. We're still trying to learn the process as well. And then our recommendation going forward to the County Commission is that the zoning administrator be the land use authority. So that is one thing that you can discuss and recommend something different if you so choose.
And Now it's time for public comments. If
Oh,
there
is it
are
time
any,
for-
do you
oh,
want
I
to
was
make?
gonna ask a
Oh,
question.
yeah, actually, we should probably see if there are any other questions amongst all of us, also of staff, before we go to the public.
Yeah, you guys go ahead and then if you don't, if it's not answered.
If anybody online wants to speak to this draft subdivision ordinance, please raise your hand with the little hand raising thing on Zoom. If you're waiting to comment on the land use element update, that is still coming. So we'll keep an eye out. If you want to talk about the subdivision ordinance, please raise your hand.
So do we have any questions? And Trish, you're certainly welcome to ask a question.
Yeah,
Yes.
so you said that there's 4 cycles and you said 20 days per cycle. So are you saying in theory, there's 80 days total?
Correct, and that's for preliminary. That's for preliminary plat and final plat. So both of those things, which follows a much longer cumbersome process right now. Okay. And I also need to clarify, it gets kind of confusing. We, the county, have 20 days for each cycle. If we request additional information of the applicant, they have 20 days to respond. So it can be longer than that, depending on if we, the county, need more information, if we, the county, have questions, all those kinds of things. So it can go longer than 80 days. So if the applicant does not respond within 20 days, then we, the county, when they finally do submit the things, another 20 days is added. There's this whole, yeah. So, but we, the county, if everything were perfect, and we had everything we needed, we didn't have any other questions from the applicant, we literally could review it and approve it in one cycle if we had everything we needed. If that makes sense.
As a clarifying question on that, so let's assume the applicant is very responsive, gets everything, then the most the county could slow the applicant down is 80 days.
That is correct.
Got it.
But if everybody is taking as long as they possibly can, not including days on which determinations are issued, it could take as many as 156.
Nice math. I'm gonna believe you on that. Although I'm not sure how 820s ended up in 156. Anyway,
20 days, 820s minus 4, the decision dates of 4 seconds.
okay, we're gonna go with that. So if an applicant is prepared and submits everything they need, it's a pretty quick process for them. If they can also request a pre-application conference, we cannot make that mandatory. So we would hope that people would do the pre-application knowing that it will speed things up once they hit the review cycles. But if they choose not to do that, that's their choice. So, and so we hope that it will encourage folks to do a pre-application conference.
So are you going to have to bypass DRT meetings?
We're just discussing other ways to handle the DRT meetings because of this process. And so we're already kind of implementing making them mainly via email unless there really is a reason for the group to get together. So that's the goal.
Well, and I just want to make a comment that if the land use code is written well, which I think it is, processing it as the zoning administrator, it's just as easy as that's just one step that the developer would miss, is taking it to a public hearing, which if the code is written well, zoning administrator can say that
Yeah,
and it gets done just as well.
correct.
So I
And,
don't think it's
right
taking
now,
too much away from the county.
yeah, right now, the zoning administrator has the authority to approve the preliminary plat. So that's already in place.
Yeah.
And then if someone meets all the conditions of the preliminary plat, submits their final plat, they're really, as long as they're in compliance with the preliminary plat, there's no discretionary decision making. There's no questions. It's just they meet everything. Okay, fine. So sending it to the county commission for that final stamp right now can take a long time and slows down the process and things like
And
that.
it's something to take it on the council's commission's table. I mean, it's something that's simple.
Yeah.
and Time consuming, so.
True, and it's not a
It's a good idea.
yeah, and it's not a discretionary land use decision. It's, you know, it's administrative, so.
I just have two questions. One, a really quick clarifying question, just to be abundantly sure, but your department is the zoning administrator?
The planning and zoning director specifically is the zoning administrator, or his or her designee. But, and that would come in the case of like other staff helping to review for completeness, other staff helping to, you know, write letters asking, hey, we need more things, but the zoning administrator issues the final decision.
Awesome, thank you. And then the second one was, and just, I think this is probably more just a matter of curiosity, but with the 4 cycles, I get that the spirit of this is just to fast track and just streamline the process. But I could see something where like an applicant, you know, it goes through first review and it's incomplete and, you know, you ask for these changes or what have you. And let's say that they just don't really do all their homework, right? And then they resubmit, you're like, well, this isn't complete. You kind of, you push them back. I guess I'm just, what then happens, like 4 strikes and you're out? Like, what-
Yeah.
I don't get
And
it.
so completeness review is different than once we've deemed it complete. Right, so we still have the completeness review time frame for us, which is the 30 days still. But once we deem it complete, that's where things have to roll, things have to move. So what's been happening is oftentimes we'll deem something complete, we'll deem a subdivision complete, and then it'll go to the development review team and some issues will come up. Well, what about this or what about that? And so that's when we send a letter to the applicant saying, hey, there's concerns about this, there's concerns about that. And then they have to respond. And so the way this code is written, it has to be extremely specific comments. So the comments can only pertain to anything in the code related to their zone or the approval criteria for a subdivision, anything missing from the plat. So it's really specific. We can't suggest, well, we think you should be doing 6 more lots instead. You know, it takes away some of that those discretionary comments that may have been happening that really aren't related to, can you approve this as proposed?
Perfect, thank you.
All right. Next, or Tony next, I couldn't. I'll let you guys decide.
Have you foreseen any scenarios where either an applicant or the county can get themselves in a bind with that 20-day review approval cycle if we're dependent on an extra third-party body for review of like what happens if either one of those parties is like, well, you're good, like we haven't seen some engineering, some environmental clearance, some regulatory consultation that I can think of some that take upwards of a year. What happens to either party when there's a third party that's involved and like you're gonna need this to get this approved? But it's like neither the county or the developer's fault that it takes longer than 20 days.
So there's some provisions in the code that just state that if either party takes longer than 20 days, then it is, I'll have to go to the language to read it because I'm trying to remember. There's language in the code that deals with that. So if either party takes longer than 20 days, these things kick in, right? And so that can be, let me get to the right spot here, sorry. Still learning this one too.
I also understand that's not a very material question. We cannot change the 147.
You cannot, yeah, so,
I'm just curious if they thought about that.
okay, so hang on. Let's see if we can find it really fast. So, and this is where things get a little confusing too. If on the 4th or final review, which could mean if our final review is the third review cycle, that could mean the final. The county fails to respond or approve within 20 business days. The county shall, upon request of the property owner, and within 10 business days, yada, yada. If it's arising from the subdivision improvement plans, then an appeal a panel has to be assembled, and it says who that has to be. And then for a dispute arising from the subdivision ordinance, we have to advise the applicant in writing of the deficiency and of their right to appeal the determination. So the designated appeal authority in this case, I believe, would be the hearings officer. So I don't know, as far as, I think what you're getting at, Tony, is let's say we needed DEQ to provide a comment.
Or a cultural resource survey or something.
Something like that. So a cultural resource survey is a little different. So oftentimes when you have a preliminary plat, there can be conditions placed upon that preliminary plat. So before we can approve your final plat, you must provide proof of X, Y, Z. And as long as it's related to code requirements, they then can take that time to go get that done. It stops the time frame, right? And then when they finally submit that, they don't have to start all over with the time frame. The time frame starts from, okay, we've had 3 review cycles. Here's all the stuff you told us you wanted prior to final plat. It's taken us 6 months, but here you go. And then boom, like, you know, the whatever's left in that review cycle clock is what we, the county, have to respond.
That makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's a good question. So it does kind of stop everything if it's an agency or something that requires a lot of time.
Yeah, how many of these do you do a year on average? I mean, I guess you guys are newer at this, but
I mean,
how
that's
many you have right now?
That's a good question, Aaron. And, I don't know, I'm on my 4th month, so Mikkel might be better to answer that question. But right now, we just sent 2 at the last county commission meeting that were final plats. We have probably 3, 4 sitting in our office right now. Some are minor subdivisions, which would, so it's only for residential. So,
Right.
you know, we've got 4 or 5 in our office right now, just waiting for review. We have 3 that have been in review for quite a while, for various reasons. And so, it's just it's a way to make sure that we're not taking too long.
How much time does it take to do each one of these?
I really can't say. It depends on the application and the complexity of the application. So one might think, oh, well, a 2-lot residential subdivision seems fairly easy. Well, it can depend on what zone they're in. It can depend on if there's drainage or access or are easements required, or, you know, so a lot of that kind of kicks in. So, you know, my goal is always to, when we're fully staffed, to try to get something like that out in 90 days. It shouldn't be extremely complicated. But they can be. So you might get 100-lot subdivision, right? That is going to increase that review time. This doesn't say how many residential lots. So we could get 100-lot single family residential subdivision, and that could take a longer time. So it really depends. I hate to be vague.
Yeah,
on that,
no,
but
what I'm asking is like,
And Trish must actually know the answer because you.
I don't.
But you guys have done each one of them, right?
So
That you have.
So the county commission gets the final plat, you know, it's all in a nice package.
with the
And,
recommendation.
you know, we say, okay, they've met everything they need to meet. And there usually isn't much discussion because it's very black and white at that point. Yeah. It should be.
How do you feel
But
about
I'll wait until you feel like it's appropriate.
Yeah, I was, well,
So just to remind everybody,
I had one more
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
Yeah, you guys.
Yeah.
but just to remind everybody, we're still in this public hearing component, and I don't know if anybody else has raised their hand. So, you're welcome to leave, keep it open and we'll see if anybody chimes in. I'm just letting you know.
You know, one of the questions I have is, what would it take to teach somebody like me to be able to review one of those? Like, is it 5 hour? Would you be like, wow, we have to train you for like 5 hours? This is how you review these things. You know, like, that's why I'm like, one of these options is, you know, a planning commission look over these things. And I'm like, is that a good idea? Right? Like, I probably don't feel qualified to do it now, but I do feel that there is an argument to be made that you have a legislative check on an administrative process. And that's what I'm wondering about is like, how much time would this take? You know, on average, on this planning commission stuff, I spend 4 hours every 2 weeks, 5 hours, maybe. Would it be like, oh yeah, no, this is like going to be like, you're going to spend 7 hours on this each week. We're going to have to do a weekly meetings, you know, like that is my question.
No, I think, if you decide to go that route, I think what would happen is, if the planning commission is the land use authority, if that's what you decide to do, there would be a lot of staff review before it got to you. So I think what would happen, and I'm just speculating because we haven't worked all this out. Let's say we, the planning and zoning department would do one review cycle to kind of work out, okay, we need this, we need that, those kinds of things. And then we would have a meeting with the planning commission. Perhaps once we have everything that we've asked for, perhaps there would still be a staff report with that, you know, saying, okay, they've gotten everything done, here's everything you need, now you guys need to make the decision. So since we have to do preliminary plat and final plat in the 4 review cycles, that might be something just to consider, as far as that would mean. I would say, and again, whether you have a public hearing or not is another part of that wrinkle, okay? So the planning commission could do it as the land use authority in a public meeting. So it wouldn't necessarily be a public hearing where we do the 10-day notice before a public hearing. And that would help because that would cut down our notice time and the time that staff has to get things ready in order to notice and those kinds of things. So I think if we went that route, our recommendation, I'd check with the attorney's office before we worked all this out, would be that it be a public meeting, not a public hearing. And that way, you can put those things on the agenda a little quicker and with less notice. And you would not receive public comments officially, like in a public hearing, but the public would see it on an agenda, know what was happening, and perhaps could submit written comments. Planning commissioners. Yeah, I need to ask the attorney's office on that one because it's not a hearing. So,
Is there?
so the point really would be, I think, and Aaron, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it would be an agenda so the public would be aware of it. 2, the planning commission would get to see it and maybe with a little training. Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of stuff on the back end that staff would do that they would bring it to you, just like the staff reports that we do now. You would not be involved, I would imagine, in our initial completeness review or our review cycles where we request information. So it would come to you sort of as a package again, would be how I would envision that going. You would not be acting as staff and doing the completeness review and coordinating with other agencies. Do you see where I'm going? Okay.
It would sort of look like maybe what county commissioners do now.
Absolutely, that's correct. Thank you, Obi, because now it goes on a county commission agenda under the business agenda items. And they're presented with, here's the evidence, here's the information, and then they make the final decision. So you're right, it would look very similar to that. Yeah,
Would that eat up your 20 days? time
Yes, it
period,
would.
though? And that's,
that would be part of a 20-day cycle.
yes, but then you have too many cooks. in this.
Well, I think the commission would have to know that, and maybe this is where I think Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong. Sometimes by the time you get something, I think you mentioned in the workshop, Aaron, by the time you get something that's wrapped in a bow and like, okay, it's ready to go. Sometimes it feels like you're a little late to the game and you might notice something that you feel that is in the code and should have been addressed. But by then it feels a little late. So I think what Aaron mentioned during the workshop we had on the 28th was, is there a way for the planning commission to maybe see it sooner? I seem to recall that's what you said, Aaron. And so maybe the planning commission could look at it during the first review cycle somehow, or the second review cycle. But then it would still have to come back to you for approval if you want to be the land use authority. So the other option would be, if you want to do the public hearing, there would be a public hearing at the planning commission. The zoning administrator could still be the land use authority. But you could ask that it be part of the ordinance that there be a public hearing at the planning commission. As long as a little training with the planning commission, again, any comments that are made, if they don't relate to the code and the requirements of the code, it would just be public clamor, right? So, but that way you would get to see it. You would get to have public comment. You would get to make comments to staff. But staff would still be the rubber stamp in the end. So that's one way that might work better in that process, given the number of review cycles that we have and the time frame. Because if you wanted to see it, if you didn't want to see it at the very end when it's all wrapped up in a bow and it's too late to do anything, then you would literally have to see it twice. And so that could cause some problems in the time frame. But if you wanted to see it once, be able to provide comment, be able for the public to see it on an agenda, those kinds of things, then one public hearing at the planning commission would be a better way to go.
Doing a little bit more wildly incorrect math in my head. If you've got an average workload right now and you've got 5 of these in your shop and each one has a preliminary plat and a final plat approval, and that's having one of these on the planning commission's desk every other meeting.
Yeah, it would be. It'll keep you guys busier. And again, the public hearing is a 10-day notice, so that just adds a slightly, another wrinkle to that. So, the way I would envision that going perhaps is that we staff, planning and zoning would do the first review cycle. Let's look at it, say, we need some more stuff. The applicant would respond, here's your stuff. Then I would anticipate the second review cycle, we would probably send as a public hearing to the planning commission. And then if there's nothing wrong, boom, as soon as the meeting's over, the zoning administrator can issue an approval or a denial. If more things are identified that actually is required per code that staff missed or things like that, we still have a review cycle to say, okay, we still need more stuff, right? But again, we only get 4 total for preliminary and final. And so it's stuff for us to figure out in the process of things, how we in the department handle it. But related to your questions, I think one public hearing requirement is better than having the planning commission be the land use authority, because you have to be the land use authority for both of those things. So that, that makes it a little more complicated for the 4 review cycles.
Well, and if the applicant meets all the requirements
Yep.
in the code,
Yep.
it can't be turned down anyway. So what would the public hearing be processing?
But yeah, yes, It would mainly be so the planning commission sees it, is aware of it, and is the land use authority. So,
I'd rather do public hearing. We're just gonna see it. I mean, public meeting instead of hearing. Cause they can't, if it's meets all the requirements.
Yeah.
Meets all the requirements.
and so then you're back to how the county commission does it right now. So if it's just a public meeting, it's presented to you, it meets all the requirements, done.
And the planning commission is not a regulatory department. We can only recommend.
No, if we say you are the land use authority,
In this case.
then you are. So it is and, you know, other places, the planning commission is a regulatory authority for various things. So this is just saying this will become a regulatory authority for you. Which, you know, is not uncommon. So it's not like it's setting a precedence. But yeah, it's an added duty for the planning commission.
Yeah, I guess for me, just a couple things that stood out. I mean, I think it's one thing to remove the county commission. I think that's fine. Even though, you know, the concept behind it is we're representatives of this community. You know, we've been elected to those positions to represent the community. That being said, I also feel like the planning commission is a representative of the community in a variety of capacities. And so I hold your jobs very high. I think by removing either the county or the planning commission from these decisions, I think you're not allowing that representation to happen, kind of losing the spirit of democracy a little bit in my mind. And I agree with you, Mary. I understand it's a very rote process, but I think just allowing people to have it as an agenda item and know that it's happening, there's a lot of value in that. I just had a citizen the other day said, what happened on Roberts Road? And I was able to tell them because it came through the county commission, but it was also on a public agenda and they could see it. So I would just, you know, from my part, it's one thing to remove public comment, but I think we should keep, you know, the public involved. You know, if it's your neighborhood, you want to know what's happening in your backyard. You may not have any control over that, and that's fine, but I think just being apprised of it has some value.
And just to clarify, it is the state
I
taking away. Okay, I just want to.
I have it happen all the time.
Okay,
I'm
okay.
pretty aware of what the state does
Yeah.
to it.
Just for those listening, I just want to clarify.
I'm perfectly aware,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
you know, I think we want to do what's right for our community to the best
Sure.
of our ability while the
Sure.
state tries to squash us. So,
Yeah. I agree with all that. I think that at the least we should have a hearing, but I kind of lean on the side of having comments, but if it's gonna take super long, then yeah, we want to be able to follow the law, so might be a happy medium there.
To do a public meeting, you mean, Laura?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
We should probably make sure if we're gonna say what reform, we should make sure that citizens get to talk, but Tony, you may still have a question.
This is non-substantial. I do want to clarify really quick. In the background text here, the language reads about the option to have one public hearing. But I'm kind of gathering that Mr. Stocks is saying it could be a public meeting.
So those are two different things.
Yes, they are.
So,
I've been
no,
around the
no, I
block.
mean,
I'm just so like, so what?
no, I mean,
which-
those options are two completely different things in the sense of the process. So,
Oh,
so the zoning administrator could still be the land use authority, but you can add in the ordinance the requirement that it have one public hearing,
right.
which we're all saying, we don't really understand what that's about if it meets the code standards. So,
Right.
so
But then we were talking.
the
about
other
the-
option is if we make the planning commission the land use authority,
Mhm.
that could be done, your decision could be in a public meeting
Yes.
rather than a public hearing.
Right.
So that's the difference between the two.
Yes.
Okay,
So what I was pulling on the thread is there a scenario where I'm sensitive to your turnaround time and the time staff has to get this thing with a bow on it, because they're being made to in a very short amount of time. Has anyone considered, rather than having the planning commission be the approval, and that would make it a public meeting, just a simple public notice requirement, like a concurrent, like a call up the Publix in Moab Times and run a public.
However, we do have a number of members where we cover the regarding the money, so we will find the public. So, we can get that in but, a public notice in the paper still takes some time. In the sense that we have to find. But, I just need to add a different wrinkle to the process. If the goal is really to let the public know. You have to do a public notice and you got that before you make the decision, after you make the decision, and then another review cycle do that. Maybe we just notice it right away when we get an application. So right now, applicants for a number of applications, right? So that can help over the ability that people have in time. So that is one thing that we always do. But it's not within. And you can forward that in the recommendation as far as knowing that we didn't do the kind of office.
Given that could potentially work. I just don't know if we're allowed to add something on, like usually you can be less restrictive, you can't be more restrictive, so I'm just not sure where that falls in the attorney land, but you could make that part of your recommendation. Option A, if we could make the zoning administrator the land use authority, but that it could have a public notice in the paper before a decision is made, whatever cycle that would need to be, right? That could be one recommendation. And then, but we need the attorney's office to say if that's even possible. If it's not possible, then, so you could kind of do your motion that way. But now we're getting into motions and we're still in the public hearing and nobody's made a motion. And so I'm just,
I'm done.
yeah, okay.
I'm gonna go ahead and open it up to any other public comments that want to make comment on this issue. Anybody online? Probably not.
We have people online, but I think it's for the next item.
Okay. I think we can open it up to a motion and have some discussion on whatever
Yeah.
motion.
So I think you need a motion to close the public hearing.
Oh, yes, excuse me.
That's okay.
I'm closing the public
That's okay.
hearing now. Very good. Now are ready to.
Well, you need a motion to close
Oh,
the
we
public
need a
hearing.
motion, don't we? Thank you.
Okay,
And seconded. Okay. Now we need a vote on that motion. All in favor?
thank you.
No opposed. Now we can have a motion.
Yes.
I'll move to make a motion to anoint the zoning administrator, I don't know. To delegate the land use authority to the zoning administrator without and waive the option to have one public hearing at the planning commission.
Is there a second?
So I have a lot of thoughts on this. I'll try.
Okay,
I have a lot of thoughts on this. I'll try to really condense this. And I'll start sort of broad here. So I really understand it, and I see in this community where we have a lot of skepticism, I think, with what the state legislature kind of imposes upon us. So I heard parts of that coming up, and I'm reminded of a I guess it's probably an essay, part of a book I recently read by Jerusalem Demsis the book is called On the Housing Crisis. And she highlights how the policy of Representative Jared Polis over in Colorado seemed to differ. He seemed to flip-flop when he then became the governor. And because the reason behind that, right, is one little unit of a state and their priorities may not be in exact alignment with the greater state's priorities. And so I think central to this, right, as a nation, we're down 4 million houses or units. And one of the impediments to getting housing built is this long process to get a project approved. So I see this as streamlining that, because in development, every day that you're delayed, the cost for the end user increases. I know that from firsthand experience, having had a project approved that went through the multiple, and that was back when the planning commission would weigh in and they would send a recommendation on the preliminary plat. And now that's done administratively. But what I can say firsthand from that meeting was a lot of it was, we had, like us, we're all well-meaning, fairly knowledgeable, at least I can speak for myself, I'm not an expert in any of these areas. And we were questioned about, well, what's the, looking at this rendering here, well, what's the fire turnaround going to be like? Talking about a lot of these things that are very code-based, that's the law. Of course, if you approve it, it's not like we can build it if we're not following the law. So we went through these really, in my mind, what felt like pretty unnecessary meetings that just really dragged on. And it was like, I'm sitting there kind of pulling my hair out in my mind, because it's like none of that was of consequence, essentially. And so it kind of wasted the commissioner's time. It wasted my time as the applicant, staff's time. And so that's where I don't think the planning commission needs to weigh in, because if we have criteria that's black or white, pass, no pass, why bring in another link into the chain? Because again, that's just going to increase the cost ultimately for the end user. We're trying to make things more affordably. The odds are already stacked against us in this community because the price to build is so high. So one thing that comes to mind for me in this, I do wonder if there are some other ways that we can inform the community, like a report out. To Trish's point, I think that's a good point of, being able to respond, well, hey, this is what's going on in our community. But there is a risk, I think, of over democratization where we slow down the process, and let's inform those who need to be informed. And if you have no action to take on that specific thing we're talking about, let's eliminate that link from the chain. I also am just concerned about, if planning commission is involved in this, what happens if we don't have a quorum? Now there's a delay. How does that play in 20 days? Now we've got this helter-skelter system that we're trying to, accommodate, I guess. And I think I'll end it there. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm I'm inclined to vote in favor of Steve's motion under protest simply because of the very real world conditions about the amount of timeline this Senate bill gives our staff to do their jobs. And about the very real like consequences to be felt of fumbling this even just a couple of times. This was a bill tailor made to slap our community with the wrist. They're waiting for us to drop this ball. They are straight up. They want us to choose the most complicated solution so that they can come here and become more convenient. And so they're kind of given the sidebars that the land use code says what it said. These are administrative decisions. You only get, at a maximum 80 days to figure this thing out. There's two class, probably see the preliminary and the final. We'll probably see you got one of those every other meeting, right? Excluding holidays. Sometimes we don't have a quorum, sometimes we have to cancel it. The choice we've been given here is not the choice. So, fine. I don't feel like what this does really takes away the democratic authority of the Planning and Zoning Advisory Board, which is a real name, to do things like make recommendations on changes to the land use code, which is where the bulk of our real authority lies in the first place. And we can influence these administrative decisions that will be made through better detail and more comprehensive understanding of that land use code and paying more attention to it and reviewing it. I don't like it, but under protest, I really don't see what else we can do that will result in.
But can't we make changes if we decide to go one way? We can, and it's not working, we can change it next year.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's kind of a test case for a lot of places. So some counties had to adopt it earlier this year, and they were mainly the much larger counties up near Salt Lake. And then a lot of us smaller counties are having to adopt it by the end of December. So we do have some test case from those larger counties and how things are going. And you're correct, Laura. If we wanted to try it one way first and see how it went, we could always go back and amend it.
Bob, I've a couple things. One, Steve, I would thinking about amending your motion in two ways. One, I think how I will possibly propose an amendment that we have at least a public meeting, if not a public hearing. I feel that keeping our pulse on what's going on in the county, for me, there's all this stuff going on in the office that I don't know what's going on. And I kind of want to know what are developers doing? What are the challenges we're seeing? And I would like to be kept apprised of oh, hey, future discussions. Did you notice on this thing that we could have done this better? I really think that would help me see this process.
And can I add to that too?
Yeah.
I think the public in general would be able to your friends, you're going to be able to talk to and be like, okay, this is how it works. More people knowing how the process works helps the public in general, I think.
Yeah. And if we see holes in our code that we're man, this piece of property could have had more employee housing if we would have done this thing, and having a point of contact where we're seeing what's going on. I would like that, just making decisions, right? And I think that either that public hearing or public meeting part, I would like to see in there. The second thing is, this is nothing against you guys, but as I've been here 2 years, we've gone through two planning directors and numerous staff. And so there is a thing where I'm like, at least seeing things, it's like, oh, hey, did you know that, oh, this subdivision, this is where like everybody goes through and has public access, and no one knew about this because we have some, new, planning commissioner from out of state that never been back there and is like, oh yeah, we never knew that. That was on any other map. And so it's like, oh no, there's a historical right of way there that one of us might know. And I see it as like, yes, this is an administrative thing and I'm totally into like streamlining housing, but for us to see segments of the process, I would like to, I'm just taking like, how open are you guys to amending that? That would be my only caveat to that.
I think, no, those are some valid points, because I think, right, if this is all happening at the staff level, then when it comes time to make adjustments to the land use plan, whatever,
Right.
like what sort of information do we have to see what's working well, what could be changed?
Yeah.
I wonder if to continue streamlining things, is there some other mechanism, and this might require more brainstorming, but any other system or process in which staff can keep commissioners, county commissioners and planning commissioners just more up to date with things? Like, would we schedule like a quarterly review that we could workshop and learn from? Because it is top of mind for me to keep the process moving along and remove all those hangups, because it really is a severe impediment. And like, what is our goal? Do we want housing or not?
Yeah.
I think what's funny with the state too, what Tony's saying is like, I mean, most of us here are like pro housing, like I'm just kind of like, okay, like I'm not necessarily against this. The other amendment.
Can I respond to Steve's question really quick? Okay. So before I forget what his question was.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, I think there's a way we could work that in somehow, Steve. And you mentioned like, is there a report we could do out to the community? But speaking back to, there's county commission liaisons on things, right? So Trish is here tonight because she's our planning commission liaison. It could be where maybe we look at a member of the planning commission has to be involved in one of those review cycles. And maybe that could be an internal decision. That doesn't make it more or less restrictive in my mind. And again, I'd like to ask the attorney's office about this, but it just adds another person reviewing something in that review cycle. We're not messing with the review cycles. We're just adding another member of the review team, right? So it could, I'm just going off the top of my head. Maybe a planning commission member could be part of one of or all of those review cycles. For consistency, it would be nice if it was the same planning commission member, maybe every 6 months, every year, every quarter, versus getting a new one every single time, because that could, just for consistency's sake. So, but that's my first thought, is that's one option. And then that one person could report back to the planning commission, hey, here's what I saw, here's what's happening, right? Just like Trish does at being at these meetings and reporting to the county commission. So that's one idea. I also like the report idea. I'm a huge fan of training always, and I always encourage, and Erin came in today to talk about the land use element, just so that continual talking and seeing how things work is one way that you learn, right? I need to ask you questions. I need to understand this. And I encourage all of you to come talk to me or call me or whatever. But absolutely, we could do like quarterly check-ins on this as we start this process. And we could report back to the planning commission, okay, we've been doing this for 3 months and here's what's been happening. This really didn't work because of these reasons, or, and so, the attorney's office and the county commissioners are going to want to know this too. How is this working? So absolutely we can report back on how things are going. So that's just off the top of my head what I was thinking. And sorry I interrupted you, Aaron, but I didn't want to forget his question.
I'm gonna go ahead and say, you know, that I actually like the idea of a public hearing. I like the idea of you being the kind of authority. And I like the idea of all of us remembering that it is an administrative decision, so we try not to ask things that unless they have something to do with, well, the code is being violated in some way. I remember one time Lynn Jackson came on a thing that was in his particular area, and it was maybe nobody else has been around as long, except for Mary, of course. But he brought up something about, well, you know, if you have a cul-de-sac, you can only have so many houses on it. And it was something that came from, he wasn't a commissioner at the time. He was just a citizen at the time. And it was like, almost everybody was like, oh, you know, there's 14 houses on the cul-de-sac. I'm making this up. That part of it, you can only have 8. And so there's something kind of nice of having a public hearing. Maybe something will come up, but mainly the public hearing, from my perspective, probably is people get to say, well, I got to have my say about it, and to get to know about it. So there's, in some ways, I like the idea of a public hearing at the end.
So would your motion was no public hearing, no public meeting.
Yeah, meeting I meant, of course, not hearing.
Okay, all right.
And so you would be in favor of amending the motion with a public meeting.
I was, but I can't make any motion myself. Oh, I could. How about it's not really a problem.
In that meeting, you're suggesting we kind of do it in the middle of the process and not on the final.
I'm honestly not sure right now, Aaron. I think that if the planning commission wanted to go the route of, so the way that the Senate bill is telling us we have to do things. If you want the zoning administrator to be the land use authority, you can use the option of one public hearing. I would need the attorney's office to weigh in rather than one public hearing. Can we make it one public meeting? I don't think so. So I just, and I'm sorry, I was kind of hoping one of them would join us tonight because I had a feeling these questions would come up, but,
What you're saying, I think
so
you're right.
I just, if we said, no, we don't want it to be a public hearing, we want it to be a public meeting, we might not be following what they're telling us we have to do. So again, I know this makes your motions extremely complicated, but you may want to go back to this option A, B, depending on what the attorney's office says. But I hear what you're all saying. I mean, I'm sensing some concern about no public knowledge in some way. And maybe that knowledge could be handled a different way where there's access to and the planning commission has done this. The planning department has done this in the past and it's fallen by the wayside given our staffing situation where we post all the current applications on the website and we let everybody know they can go in and look at them and, you know, those kinds of things. So anyway, I hear what you're saying. I just don't know if per what's coming down from the state that would work. Or if we would also still have to have a public hearing. So I just don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry, I just don't know the answer.
So it seems like right now, since we're just a recommending body, there's really no repercussion for the motion we make. I think we could, you know, and with Trish's being the conduit, sorry, words here. We could at least express to the county commission what we're thinking as we get some legal review on the meeting
Yeah.
versus hearing.
Absolutely, and the staff report to the commission could express, okay, here's the recommended motion, but they really had questions about these things that would need the attorney's office to weigh in on. And hopefully the attorney's office could weigh in on that before the county commission has to make a decision. So, yeah, absolutely.
Does that leave us with potentially an amended motion?
I mean, you could vote on the motion that's been made and then request that all these questions get forwarded to the attorney's office, and those answers also get put in the staff report to the county commission. Or you can try to deal with amending the motion, but might want to go with the cleanest recommendation and then all your questions, but that's up to you all. There's a motion on the table that needs a vote.
Since we're still in discussion about, the question I would have is if a motion came from us that said, we'd like a public hearing and you'd be the land use authority, and that motion got passed or tied 3-3, is that a stronger recommendation to the county commission than saying, well, we passed this one, but there was some favorability toward having it? So I just put that consideration on the table for anybody's thoughts.
I'll make a motion, Bob, that we,
There's a motion on the table that needs a vote.
well, can we amend that motion?
Yes,
You
Yeah.
can, it's,
Yeah.
sometimes it's easier to vote it down and then just make a new motion, but I'm gonna leave that up to you guys.
Sure.
But yeah, you're welcome to try to amend it, Aaron. I didn't know that's what you're gonna do. So why don't you try to amend it? Go ahead.
I was just going to amend it, Steve's motion to say that,
Well, anybody can second the amendment.
We'll vote on it. All in favor of the motion? All vote. Oh. I thought. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hang on one second.
Yeah. Sorry. Sorry, no, waiting my turn. I was waiting my turn. Yeah, good.
Give me now 1 second. Yeah.
No vote. Yeah. Are we ready?
Turn up the mic until, exactly which device you plug in. I don't have to reboot, please. No reboot right now, okay. The Real Tech Audio Console, so you can get where the sound is coming from.
Someone just made it.
Almost like something is sitting on this and making it bigger. That's nice. Everybody, thank you. Um, So it's on the microphone array real tech audio. And for speakers, it's on real tech audio. Okay.
I thought you were just.
My. Did anybody know? Which computer is it? Mhm. Okay, so. So it does. Oh, no. Okay, so it does say. Okay, we're gonna wrap the phone down. Okay. Well, we're on the correct microphone and speaker according to the screenshot. Oh, wait. No, hold on 1 second. Message. It says, which device did you plug in? Mic and headphone headset. I don't know. So it's on the correct setting now, where the settings are. I'm trying to get those, I'm having to do that. You never seen that message that's popping up. So.
Yeah, we're taking 5 minutes, we come back in, 5 minutes. I didn't realize it's on both.
Okay, do you have it up on YouTube? Yeah, I'm gonna call someone who is on YouTube.
This is Ashley Stevens at Interact.
No, this
This was added to it. If I didn't see.
Yeah.
Hey, Thomas, we just changed a setting. We're wondering if you can hear us now.
Here,
Let me see.
You can now hear us. Okay, fabulous. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's just
Hi, everybody. All right.
Okay, the recess is over and I think we were about to discuss a motion.
Specifically the amended motion to approve the zoning administrator as the land use authority with the option to have one public hearing. I just wanted to say, I'm inclined to vote in favor of this because it just kind of helps move things along. And I agree wholeheartedly in the spirit of having greater transparency in these things. I will point out for the consideration of the group, two things: that having the public hearing as an option by default in the spirit of consistency will mean that we always have a public hearing, which will add timeline challenges to staff and potentially throw a wrench in the mix if we cannot have a quorum or if there's an application received on a holiday. Timeline things there, that's going to be tight. And the second thing to consider is that out of the context of this specific land use authority bill, a public hearing is a legislative action. What this will be is proposing to have a legislative hearing, and the people who speak at a public hearing are given testimony. That is what that is. But there will be no actual legislative determination to come from that public hearing. And I have, in general, concern about confusing the public's trust in the process by saying we're having a public hearing and you can pipe up, speak your piece, but we're not going to be able to do anything about your concerns.
So just to clarify though, Tony, a public hearing just in and of itself is not a legislative action. I just want to clarify that we're having a public hearing right now.
Yeah.
So it's more a mandatory step in the process.
I mean, outside of this process, a public hearing
Yes.
is typically
Okay.
used and understood in the spirit of the Open and Public Meetings Act. A public hearing is almost always applied as a legislative action. That's what, we're voting right now, and that's what I mean by legislative, is like resulting in a vote that contemplates public testimony, where this public hearing will not. And that, I think, may create an environment where, why did I even bother to come in and talk? Because they couldn't vote on anything I had to say anyway. I'm getting to like the spirit of the law type considerations. Just something to think about. Like, transparency is great. How will that make the public feel?
I'm just going to ask, are we? I should listen more carefully. Are we trying to make this a public meeting and not know whether the lawyer will agree that it's a public meeting? It's possible. Or are we suggesting that it should be a public hearing?
So Aaron made a motion
Yes.
and it was seconded by Mary that said that the zoning administrator would be the land use authority, but that there would be at least one public hearing. So that's the way the code from, or the Senate bill came to us. And so I hear what you're saying, Tony. However, the state called it a public hearing,
Yeah.
and I checked a number of times. Is it really a public hearing or can it be a public meeting? And
Yeah,
yeah, so I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, it's going to be called a public hearing,
Correct.
but that might not what the public thinks that is and what is actually going to happen as a result of having that public hearing isn't going to be the same thing. And my comment addresses the public's perspective on what is going to be.
Any other comments? Okay, we're voting then on the amended motion first. How many are in favor of the amended motion? Opposed?
Are you going to say if it passed or not?
And it passed, yes.
Okay, thank you. I was
Yeah,
waiting to
yes,
speak
yes.
until you said that.
Okay, yes.
I do want to ask, in my staff report to the county commission, do you want me to include all those various questions that came up about, public meeting versus public hearing, about, could we, anyway, I'll have to listen to, to the recording again, because I honestly couldn't remember all the questions that came up. But would you like me to include some of those questions and get some answers from the attorney's office, or are you just like, no, this is our motion?
My intention, and thank you for just taking on more and more work as we come up with ideas. But I would hope that at the county commission in a couple of weeks, they have enough information to make an informed choice to take our recommendation and tweak it as they feel
Thank
is fit.
Okay, understood.
Agreement with that.
Okay,
That sounds great to me.
okay,
County attorneys.
okay, thank you. I understand. All right. And isn't it funny? I put this one first on the agenda because I thought it would be quicker than the next one. So all those waiting to speak on the land use element, I apologize. I thought this one would go a little faster, so we never quite know when we choose the order of the agenda. Okay, moving on, Obi.
Okay, moving on, I'm going to open a public hearing to consider an update on the Grand County General Plan 2030, repealing and replacing Section 6 land use and future land use map plan for Spanish Valley. And I guess staff report first, Amy.
Yeah, so we had a workshop on this as well on October 28th, and I will say, I think they're still on. Thomas Eddington and Matt Ingalls from CZB, our consultants on this, are on the Zoom. So they're here for questions. They're here if the public has questions, those kinds of things. So thank you for hanging in there, you guys. This is an update to Section 6 land use is the official title of it, of the general plan. So there was a 2012 general plan that was updated on May 17th of 2022, and it was called General Plan 2030. And in that plan, there was some very confusing language in red text saying the following land use designations are meant to guide the direction of the general plan at this stage, and current land use designations are placeholders before a redraft of this section. So it was basically intended to be immediately rewritten after it was adopted. So here we are, 2024, 2 years later, working on this revision. So just to make sure everybody understands, so the general plan is made up of a lot of chapters. And those chapters include economic development, they include housing, they include transportation, they include environmental. So there's a whole bunch of chapters in the general plan. And that whole general plan guides everything that happens here in the county. It's a guide, right? So chapter 6, land use, is one chapter of that general plan. So that is what we're proposing to update, revise, amend. And this would repeal and replace the existing chapter 6 land use. So that means we're not revising it. We are literally replacing it with this proposed revision, okay? So we, CZB was hired to, take a look at this section, and part of their direction was to make it more user-friendly, more clear, more understandable, and have illustrations that help people understand what these things mean. So that was the direction to whatever firm was hired through the RFP process. And CZB was hired. They've done a great job. They are out of, well, they're here in Utah, but they're also have folks that work for them in other places. So I can go through this land use plan a little bit. In addition to the land use, chapter 6, land use of the general plan, there is a map. So there is an associated future land use map. We call it a FLUM for short. The chapter 6 land use explains the designations on the future land use map in a sense. It explains sort of the history of the valley, what's been happening, and what we'd like to see happen. This is a future plan, what we'd like to see happen in the next 10 to 20 years. So general plans are required by the state to be updated. And so it was adopted in 2022. We're readopting it now. So this plan, in a sense, would be in effect for about 10 years unless we decide to do it earlier. So it's also, telling us what will happen in the next 10 years. And that's based on growth and what we would like to see happen in the county. Okay, so this is only updating the future land use map for Spanish Valley. So in the 2012 general plan, there were 3 separate maps. There was the future land use map for Spanish Valley. There was one for Thompson Springs. There was one for Cisco. And so it called it North Valley. So this is essentially doing the same thing. We're only looking at one map for Spanish Valley right now. We're not looking at the future land use map for the entire county, just to clarify. This is introducing a new way of describing things, a new classification system where oftentimes you'll talk about general plan designations. So you might just see low density residential, and that would be like minimum acre 1 lot size type of a thing. So, and then you might see medium density or high density. Those would be general plan designations, okay? And then there'd be different zones that would be allowed in those designations, and those would end up on the zoning map. So this is the future land use map, and we're calling them place types in this new land use element. So the place types that are being proposed include this list here. So regional centers, neighborhood centers, mixed use, flex commercial. It goes on, you see it on your screen. So each place type has a general description of the appropriate uses envisioned for these areas. So once approved and adopted, property owners could look at their land, find it in the designated area, and understand what's supposed to be happening maybe to their property and properties around them. It does not instantly cause a zone change. It does not instantly change anything about your property if you're a landowner, other than the options that are available to you if that designation changes from what you currently have. So if I was rural residential and now I'm getting changed to compact neighborhood, basically that would mean that my density is increasing if I so choose, and maybe the housing types I'm allowed could change. But again, it's the property owner that then has to request a zone change in order to make that happen. So this is, as we've talked about, like the 50,000 foot level, where eventually we'd like to see this whole area be a compact neighborhood. But in order to do that, a property owner has to want to do that and has to request a zone change and request a development. So the county is not all of a sudden saying, we're gonna make this whole area change now. It's not up to us. It's up to us to decide with lots of public workshops and public input. This has gone on since 2022, what the public would like to see. And this is going to be based on those workshops and that input. It is still ultimately up to the property owners to decide if they want to do anything with their property. I just want to make that clear. So, a property owner would have to request a zone change and then do development. So it's a two-step process. It doesn't just happen immediately. Okay. So, I'll let CZB chime in if we need them to, but, so the things I wanted you to look at when reviewing the draft are, when you look at those place types, is there anything that you feel isn't represented, right? So if you're looking at uses, commercial, light industrial, did you see all of those things that you would like to see listed in the descriptions of those place types? Are the locations that are proposed for those place types, are the locations appropriate? So as you look at, are we proposing increased density? Are we proposing a mixed use situation? Do you feel that those locations are appropriate? Types of housing. So the place types mention single family homes versus multifamily apartments. So as you look at those place types and their location, are the housing types, do you feel, are those appropriate for both those things? Are the areas being considered for increased density appropriate? Are the illustrations helpful, right? The illustrations that we'll go through. And then is it clear and understandable, you know, what existing zoning designations correspond to the proposed place types? But keep in mind that after we do the update to the land use chapter and the future land use map, the next step, standard procedures, is that the next step is an update to the land use code. So our land use code won't exactly match our new land use chapter right away. So once we finish this adoption of the general plan land use chapter, I have in the budget to immediately turn around in 2025 and do a complete land use code revision that would then reflect the new land use chapter. Okay, so it can be confusing, so fire away with questions. I'm going to pull up the actual draft chapter, and we do have, as I said, CZB is online if we have questions for them. I think what we'll do first is take public comment. There's been a lot of people wanting to speak to this. And then I think it would be helpful if perhaps I might let CZB chime in. We compile all the questions that might be coming from the public hearing, and then CZB could respond to each one. Or Thomas, would it be better if you respond to each person making public comment, respond to their question right away? That's one thought. So I'm just gonna run through some of this really quick so that people can sort of see what we're talking about if people haven't seen it yet. So it's going to look much different than the current land use chapter. That was the direction that CZB was given months ago when they responded to the RFP. So you'll see that there's an introduction section, which is typical. It talks about what is a land use plan, what can it do and not do. It gets into what type of a process this was. So it started May of 2022, as soon as the last land use chapter was adopted. A number of things were put in motion, and you can kind of see the timeline here on the screen. And so the goal is to adopt this by the end of this year. So that is the goal. You can see the history of the public process and the community input. And then it goes into how did we get here as far as some community demographics. Where have we been growing? How have we been growing? What do we think is going to happen? All those kinds of things. So that's all in here. And these are all typical for a land use chapter of a general plan. And then it talks about the vision and growth framework. What are the challenges? What are the planning principles? What do we feel our most important things are? That's all in here, the growth framework. And then it finally gets into the map itself. So it's talking about one of the goals was more centers and less sprawl. So the goal was to have more compact neighborhoods where people can go shopping, where they can do some business, where they can have a cup of coffee without having to drive all the way into town. So there's some neighborhood centers proposed. There's some regional centers, which is more shopping for the whole county, where you might see large shopping centers, those kinds of things. So these are all described in here, regional centers, neighborhood centers, with illustrations as to what those might look like. We also have define and protect the edges, as far as there's some areas of the county where we don't want to see increased growth, where we want to preserve that land. There's capitalizing upon the local community character. So again, there's some places that natural landscape and we'd like that to remain, right? Versus a built landscape. And then the future land use. So that's when we finally get into the actual map and the place types. So here the place types are listed. They're color coded. They're color coded on the map. Whenever you see all this gray, that is not in our jurisdiction. That is the city of Moab. That is within their city limits. And we have no jurisdiction over that area. So if you see colors on this map, that is what we are discussing. And this goes into, again, these place types and describing the place types and a graphic depiction of what that might look like. So compact neighborhood, moderate scale, you can see the compact, it's more dense. There's different housing styles. The moderate scale, you basically single family dwellings and on and on. So this is a nice illustration of what those things might look like. We're also identifying areas where we might want to see different growth or different things happening. A lot of people know about the uranium mill tailing site. Eventually that will be redeveloped into something that does not include any type of residential. It has to be more open space. We've talked about sports park. There's been talk about amphitheaters. There's been talk about things like that. So, and then it's talking about how you have to do a rezoning request to match whatever designation place type you are given. So right now we've kind of created a little graphic of what zones exist now and what place types those might go into, so you can kind of understand how these zonings might relate. So for instance, neighborhood commercial is a zone we currently have, and that would be somewhat similar to a neighborhood center place type. So this is just to kind of help your brain wrap around how these might translate. But the goal is to do a land use code revision, and maybe there'd be different zones created and different names for those zones. So this talks about what next. So what next would be a zoning code update. We're talking about ways to make housing, the development of housing easier for developers, more clear, more understandable, faster processes. Also, economic incentives and partnerships with people that own land, private folks that own land, and how we might team up with them to get some housing developed. So it kind of goes into that. Partnerships with City of Moab and UDOT and the National Park Service, things like that. So that is the plan in a very quick nutshell. We'll let the public comment speak, and then I think CZB may want to speak to some of those comments. So I think if there's some questions that staff or the Planning Commission can't answer, we'll let CZB chime in and answer some of those questions. So I think we'll just open up for public comment and take it as it comes.
Why don't we start with those in the room who would like to make a public comment? When you come forward, please give your name. Thank you. And 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Curtis Wells. I'm a Grant County resident, and believe it or not, I have a lot of positive things to pass around tonight, especially for you, OP. It's been a while. A few kudos real quick to your engaged commissioner here with a notebook full of notes, and I have nothing but positive things to say about your planning and zoning director, Ms. Weiser, and it's been a pleasure working with her since she's come on board, and it's awesome to see friends and folks that, you know, have been involved in planning and zoning for a while. The public has been, and myself included, anxiously awaiting this plan, you know, for quite some time and working on this plan. And so just kind of as a general overview, and I just realized Thomas Eddington, I worked with him years ago on a plan. I'm pretty sure that's who that is, Thomas Bourbon, or, he's got a bourbon that he likes, and I think it's called, don't say it, Thomas. It's something Chase, Buffalo Trace, Thomas Buffalo Trace Eddington, and that is him. I can see him. So, and probably, and honestly, the best, my favorite planning mind I've ever worked with. Nothing but great things to say about him. And so I think the plan is really great. And I think, you know, in discussing with the commissioner, like, we really do need certainty, you know, for development and how that's going to play out. And I think these guys and everyone's done a good job at making sausage here, even that it's still just kind of a guiding document that we need to come in and follow up on as property owners. And so, you know, positive things to go around, and thank you for the work you're doing there. I'm here tonight specifically to represent the trustees of SN Limited, and I have a signed affidavit and turned into the office to represent them on this matter and another matter. And of particular concern is the issue of the McKnight Industrial Subdivision, which is an industrial subdivision, as it's titled, that was approved a long time ago. And we ended up in kind of a funny situation where we're an industrial subdivision zone that was changed through a zoning amendment, we think, to MFR, multifamily residential. And then MFR zone, as you may be aware, received significant updates or amendments, I think in 2016, maybe 2015. And this plan has us featured actually as a neighborhood center, which perfectly addresses what we were trying to do. We adjoin the land trust on the on some of our borders, and you know this this plan and how and the uses you know that fall under neighborhood center accomplish exactly what we feel like it should be, given what we were originally approved for and kind of how the valley's developed there. And it's, you know, the mixed use commercial, but also that neighborhood aspect. And so I'm just here tonight to, on behalf of the trustees, to give the plan 2 thumbs up. And this has actually been a really, as of recent, a really pleasant process, and we're really happy to see the results that are in this plan. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Curtis. And anybody else in the room who wants to comment? Okay, maybe I'll let you handle the ones that are online in terms of calling them up.
Yeah, so if there's anyone online that would like to speak to the land use chapter, please use the little raise your hand thing if you can. If not, you can't find it, please just turn your video on and raise your hand that way, and we will call your name. We're looking, we do not see anyone yet. There we go. Okay, Ashley, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Steen. I am Charlie Steen's granddaughter. I'm sure many of you are familiar with his story and the story of how his 1952 discovery changed Moab and Grand County. I have submitted a letter to Amy. She said that she received it and it will be in tonight's packet. So I just wanted to be sure that that was there rather than reading
They
it.
have it.
Okay, great. So my family is very much in support of this plan. Part of what I outlined in the letter was just how we and everyone at the time was aware of how my grandfather's discovery changed the landscape and changed the town. And very similar to the 1950s, Moab is in a current tourism boom and has been. And part of what was missing in the 50s was forward thinking and planning. And so we are extremely happy to see this progressing, and it has our full support.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else online have anything they would like to comment on? Okay. Thomas or Matt, would you like to say anything at this point, or just wait and see if the commissioners have questions?
We're fine to wait and see if you guys have questions. It's good to see everybody. Kurt, everybody, nice to see you. But unless you want further explanation or some detailed explanation, we're happy to do Q&A if that's what you prefer.
Thank you, Thomas.
So, do we have any questions for staff? Okay, I guess we're ready then to close.
I'll ask a question to
You've got a question.
well-
Good. You can do it either way.
Just to the consultants, this might either be a really simple question or it might be a challenging one. I'm just curious from your perspective, right? Like you've lived and breathed in this document for quite a while. What stands out to you as a particular strength, and then also something that maybe not as strong?
I think I would say from a strength for this plan, I think is its connection to setting land use that also. Did I lose you? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, I lost you guys for a second. Okay, there you're back. I would say that the connection between really land use and housing, we heard that loudly and clearly from many in the community that was really important. And so I think, we really tried to make sure that this plan provided the right land use opportunities by way of the neighborhood centers, as well as the regional centers, as well as the compact neighborhood place types to address some of those housing issues. And, we had reviewed the 2023 Moab area housing plan, and really we wanted to make sure that those two plans spoke to each other. So I think that's a strength. A weakness, that's a hard question to answer. I guess I would say you always want to be able to go just a little bit deeper into, where the lines are. We do a lot of GIS analysis. We looked at a lot of the, obviously all of the scenario planning. I guess you always think, oh, I could have spent just maybe a little more time looking at the lines, but I don't know. We were pretty tight on that. And so I think that we've got that at a very solid level in terms of setting the place types for the future land use code that you all end up amending, that you end up working with the community if they do come in as Amy noted for rezonings. I think that you're in a solid position to address those. And I don't know, Matt, is there anything that you think I'm missing from a strength or a weakness? It's a tough question.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think, I'd like to say that, on the weakness side of it, that we wouldn't put something in the plan if we thought it was weak. So we try to do the best we can and, make it as strong as possible. No, I think it's a great plan. I think it's, there was a lot of input that we were able to use through all the public process, which I think was fantastic. So I could, honestly say that it was driven a lot by previous public input. So I think that's always a positive thing. And I think also recognizing that, character does matter to people, and trying to define that is always tough. But recognizing that it's important and that you want to make sure that you preserve some of those characteristics that define the Spanish Valley as you continue to evolve and grow. So, and I think the plan addresses that.
Great, thank you guys, and thanks for all your work on this.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. It's time to close the hearing. I don't know that we actually need a motion to close the hearing. We don't, do we, Michelle?
To close the public hearing,
Public hearing?
Yes, you
need
do,
an
but-
Actual motion.
you do, yeah, but I might, you might want to leave it open a little bit just because we'll keep watching on the screen if anybody else
Okay.
wants to chime in, just
And then
because
we
it
can
took
go
longer than we thought to get here, and so maybe somebody might check back in. So maybe just leave it open a little bit. Maybe you have questions for staff or CZB. We can kind of address those before we then close and maybe go into a motion, but I'll leave that up to you guys.
Yeah, I've got one that can keep us occupied for maybe 7 minutes. So the timeline, the real nuts and bolts of this thing is interpreting this intention and applying it to the land use code updates. You've got this in your budget for 2025. Do you have a timeline or a storyboard for how those land use updates get rolled out? I'm sure it's not one of those just like we read through that entire land use chapter. I'm sure that's going to take a while. So like, where do you think, where are you going to start first? Where, how do you foresee that process unfolding?
If it were entirely up to me, the last time the entire land use code was adopted in one fell swoop all at once, to my knowledge, was 1999. Since then, what's occurred is, depending on what's going on or depending on what needs to be updated, whether it's mandated by the state or whether it's something that the current county commission or planning commissioners or staff feel needs to be revised. Since 1999, it's been this section, that section, this area, this definition, it's been very random. And so that's why my recommendation is that we do a complete land use code revision at the same time of the entire land use code. What happens when these little piecemeal things happen is you don't always realize the consequences of changing one thing in one section. Oftentimes, it affects other sections that you didn't even realize. And not only that, it can affect definitions, it can affect processes, it just can affect everything. So my goal is that if the budget is approved with the line item I have proposed for the land use code revision, we would then send out an RFP as soon as possible in January. That process can take 4 to 6 weeks typically, sometimes longer. And then we would get that consultant hired and give them some direction. They would have our new land use chapter, our new future land use map to work on, and they would start working. And so there would be some public workshops involved, there would be public hearings involved, all those kinds of things. So, a very aggressive schedule would be 6 months, and that would be if everything went as planned. So, realistically, I'm just going to say June through September would be fabulous. A complete code revision takes some time and takes lots of meetings. But it's much easier when you have a brand new land use chapter and a brand new future land use map, because that is the guide for the code. So, but in an ideal world, if everything goes absolutely perfect, the soonest it would probably happen is 6 months.
Thank you. That was, it's always a leading question for me. For the record, emphasis on more public process.
If you guys want to close the public hearing, you can go for it. Just so everyone knows, there will be another public hearing at the county commission. So if anybody's listening and their friends might say, well, I didn't even know this was happening and I didn't get to, there's another public hearing at the county commission. Our goal is to have it on the county commission agenda as a public hearing item on December 3rd. Is the goal. Hopefully that'll happen. So if it doesn't happen, the only next meeting it could go on would be December 17th. So, but there'll be a public hearing notice for that county commission meeting. So, you can submit comments, things like that. So,
Should I have a motion to close the public hearing? Second. It moved and seconded. Any discussion? Ready to vote then? All in favor? That's unanimous. Is there a motion on the table?
I'll move to send a favorable recommendation for the adoption of the land use chapter of the general plan and the updated future land use map to the county commission for hopefully their December 3rd meeting.
Is there a second?
I can second that.
Laura seconded. Now it's time for discussion. People have any discussion, any kind of changes to the future land use map? Any other thoughts?
I will say that Aaron came today and talked with Thomas and I via Zoom. And so he had a few really good comments I just wanted to share that we talked with CZB about, and they may make a few tweaks to it before it goes to the county commission. And the biggest things that Aaron brought up, and I'll let Thomas and speak to this as well, but we felt they were good comments and deserved a quick revision perhaps. So Aaron wanted to make sure, and correct me if I say this wrong, Aaron, that he felt that there should be something in the plan that speaks more to the availability of water. And so he mentioned that there's been some studies and some plans recently that actually gave some volume, some numbers, what is our capacity for water. And so Thomas and I talked and Aaron, and we agreed that there should be something in there a little bit more specific about our water capacity. So he's going to take a look at that, and that might be something that gets added before it goes to the county commission. You wouldn't see it, but I'm just letting you know that that's something that we discussed. The other thing we discussed was, hang on. Something to Laura, yes?
And one nice source is there is a paper in hydrology
Okay,
that is good, kind of a summary of the water studies we've done over here.
yeah, if you,
I'll find that for you and send it to you.
yeah, that'd be wonderful.
My idea, because that was so controversial, studies and whatnot, there is a hard number, and that's what the state has allotted. And all I was saying is, what's that number? Because we can't fudge that either way. That's just what there is according to what the state's gonna allow. And I was kind of not suggesting studies. I mean, that's a good idea, but like, I feel like if you could just point to something that's like above us, like at a state level, where it's like, oh, we're not gonna move that number. Okay, it's 5, we have 1,000 acre feet left. I don't know. Like, that was my suggestion.
Yeah,
So-
and we felt that was a valid suggestion and something that should be added. So that's a pretty quick change to this. It's just that you will not see that.
Yep.
So I just wanted to fill you in on that. I'm also looking for the page. Aaron asked about, and Laura brought this up at the last workshop, just a question about transportation and bike ped transportation. So I'm looking for, Thomas could probably find it better than me.
I
There
think
was
we
a
were
gra-
looking at page 30, I think it was 31, 32, relative to some of the UDOT recommendations, maybe.
Okay, thank you. So CCB had put in this plan, there is a plan by UDOT, and there's a very preliminary plan out right now about improving Highway 191. there has been, I believe, one public comment. They've asked the county to comment on it, specifically our engineer, our roads department, things like that. So we provided some comments, and there was 2, maybe 3 plans, and they're online if you want to try to find them. Maybe we could post that link somewhere. So CCB had put in here sort of a preferred option for Highway 191. And we've discussed maybe removing this diagram and instead showing ideally what we would like to see as far as bike ped paths, where would parking be, you know, all those kinds of things, instead of kind of deferring to one of their plans, maybe showing what we really would like to see on arterials, collectors, highways, high-level roads. What would we as a community rather see? So I think we might explore changing out that diagram and not specifically showing one of the options that UDOT gave us. So we talked about that as well. And so Thomas said, yeah, that sounds great. And Aaron, did you want to add anything else to that?
No, I mean, I guess my thing would be like, I don't want it to look like another strip mall up in, you know, Salt Lake Valley. And it's like, come on, we could do so much. We could do something Moab and cool. You know, this is a bike town. The part of this town was founded on mountain biking. There's a huge mountain biking and cycling culture. And it's, you know, from my perspective, that's really left out.
Yeah.
Generally support the strategy of including our intentions in our plan and being, when we can, less deferential to just in general.
Right. Okay.
And we agree. And just for one more point of clarification, the plan that you see kind of on the bottom is not a UDOT recommendation. Actually, that's just a really conceptual recommendation on our part to keep, you know, essentially the width of the road where it is. And then if frontage roads are needed, those would be on the back side. That would preserve much of the space in this area. It's hard to really draw on it, for potential bike or pedestrian paths. So rather than opening up the lanes and eating it up for cars, it would preserve that area for bike paths. And I think what we're looking at is maybe trying to tweak the graphic at the bottom a little bit and add the right text that outlines it and maybe show yet another image. But this is not a recommendation by the UDOT, per the UDOT plan. This is not where they landed, actually.
Thank you, Thomas.
They're gonna plop a gondola.
Yeah. So that was the other thing that we talked about updating before it goes to the county commission. Just, you know, what do we really want to see? And then the other thing we talked about, Aaron did ask about, let me get to the map. He did ask about, he seems to recall during a lot of the public meetings, there was some discussion about what should maybe happen with the dump property. And part of that discussion, I'll let Aaron speak to this, centered on maybe that would be a good location for future light industrial or some type of a mixed use scenario, because there's already the recycling center there. There's already the dump there. And so people are used to those kinds of impacts and noises and things like that. And so I'll let Aaron speak to that. But he was saying he really thought that would have gotten onto this map, and it did not. So he just wanted to speak to that a little bit, and we thought we could let him do that. And because right now it is resort and tourist commercial. And so go ahead, Aaron.
Oh, no, that's, you know, you summed it up. And there was one other thing, but we had talked about it too, about, you know, on the northern Umtra part, it is, you know, having a transportation.
Yes, and we
just see that on that.
and that is, there is a transportation hub proposed there.
Right,
So
okay.
that one's good. But as far as this area, Any other thoughts maybe on that on the Sandflats Road heading up to the old dump? There is, in the future, that dump may, and
It's not too far.
yeah, yeah, so there's
mean,
discussion, right, Trish, that will be removed,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then the question becomes, what do we do with all that property up there? And it looks like Thomas circled it. That is a good question as far as, is that a good place for light industrial uses? There's issues with, so I know it gets a little complicated because some of that is under county's jurisdiction and some of it is under city's jurisdiction. So when you look at the road, Sandflats Road, things like that, what can it accommodate? Those kinds of questions, is water, sewer availability, all that, those are bigger planning questions than would this be an appropriate area for those types of uses? And so Aaron recalled that in some workshops that was discussed, and Trish can maybe speak to the timeline for that. And I don't know if there's any other discussions or committees or groups out there talking about what to do with this property. So, yeah.
I don't remember the timeline. I remember it wasn't super long.
Yeah.
It's maybe 3 years or something like that, but I could be wrong on that. We'd have to get that number from solid waste.
Yeah.
And I think Lions Back, the development, is quite interested in that parcel and what would happen to that parcel, which would make sense. That's all I have to say about that.
Okay. But it's a pretty,
It is
3 to
it
5,
is.
less
It's a
than
really
10
good-
years,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, they're saying, yeah, it would reach its capacity. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And then they're gonna have to relocate that elsewhere.
Yep.
So, yeah, the question just becomes what would be appropriate up there? And that's something we may want to show on this future land use map.
I would jump in just to say that with a class 4 landfill like that, you're gonna have the DEQ division, I think it's called the Division of Waste Remediation or Solid Waste Management or something like that.
Right.
There are, just like the North Umptra parcel, going to be some state mandated sidebars on what is allowed to be built there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they'll be
But
pretty
that
tight.
person
amount
is
by
more than
jump
just the dump. That's the thing. Yeah. No, I mean, great.
Sorry, I'm hearing a lot of things going on and, Chair, you need to take control of the
I
room.
was gonna say, is that an area of opportunity like Umptra? I mean, is that what it should be designated as?
Yeah, good. That's a good point, Obi. Did you hear that, Thomas?
Yeah, I did. Actually, yeah,
Okay.
we could look at that. The alternative is we could give it the mixed use flex commercial option, which would allow for mixed use, commercial, light industrial. So it would have a variety of options. So we could take a
And
look at
And some residential, right, Thomas?
allow for
In that
residential,
mixed
of course, as
use.
well.
Yeah.
Yep, that is a second use. Yep,
That's kind of the
absolutely.
most flexible designation.
That's right.
I think Obi's suggestion about an area of opportunity could be a really good suggestion for now. So yeah, I think those are all good thoughts. So,
It's certainly very vague sort of thing to say about it.
it's to say something could happen here, other than, what is shown right now. And it could, Thomas, could we do something like where we put that mixed use flex commercial designation on it, but also put the cross hatching for the area of opportunity?
Yeah,
Would we
could
do
look-
both of those things or just one?
Probably, I think my initial thought would be both if we decide to do that as an area of opportunity. And if we don't do it as an area of opportunity, either way, it should be, I think, mixed use flex commercial, which is the most lenient of the place typology. So yes, to mixed use flex commercial, and let's think about area of opportunity. Does that make sense?
My opinion on that being as mixed use flex is it's going to be used for tourism. And one of the things I see missing is like industrial serves the town and we need that. We need that kind of designation. And that is my only thing where I'm like, I like the light commercial because light industrial because that's a designation that's like lacking and needed is it a great spot for commercial tourism? Yeah, sure. But like, does it serve our town? And I'm like, I want to see things that serve our town instead of, yeah, sorry.
As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the mixed use flex commercial place type, that would allow us, when we get down to the land use map, to look at that parcel and say this like candidate for zoning type light industrial. It is inclusive of that idea. It's just not exclusive of those others at 50,000 feet. We will get to 20,000 feet, and we can address that when we do the land use, right?
That would be a correct statement. So making sure that that mixed use flex commercial does allow light industrial, and I believe it does list that now. I think what Tony's saying is we, the county, own that. So we would be the applicant for what zone we would like to see there. So I think that's what Tony was getting at there, Aaron, is that we, the county, could propose, we just want this to be light industrial, or we do want some mixed use situation up there. I just wanted to go over, let you guys know that Aaron and Thomas and I talked about those concerns he brought up today, and we felt that they were valid and should be addressed in some way. It's just that you won't see that in this draft. So when Thomas and his group have a chance to update that, we'll certainly, pass that on to you so you can see the results of that. But I thought those were really good points that Aaron brought up, and so did Thomas. And so we just wanted to share those, and then keep going.
Let my motion stand, given the information you just provided.
And I have a very, very minor thing. I believe if you take the map up to 120, I believe there's Pack Creek listed in the wrong place. And there's really two things, actually. So if you go up to the top and there's a brown area, okay, keep going. Is that brown area?
It's right in the center. It looks almost salmon or pinkish. That screen.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, it's actually, now you'd have to shoot up the map a little bit, make it bigger.
Okay.
And it's that little, okay.
This little salmon thing, right?
Yeah, that little salmon thing has Pack Creek up there. And then I have another kind of.
Sorry, just to
Yeah.
backtrack a little bit. So
Yeah,
I think
over to
we're
the
talking
right.
Two different things.
Oh.
Go over to the right for the
Yeah.
different parcel,
Okay, hang on.
different
I got
area.
Oh. Now that thing right there, blue, I guess it's the
Almost
blue.
looks like a handgun. That's
Yes.
Right here.
Yeah, right there. I think
Okay.
it says Pack Creek.
Yes, okay. Well, yes, that creek goes through there. Go over to your thoughts.
That's not Pack Creek, is it?
yeah,
That's some other place.
Oh, yeah.
It's just been labeled somehow.
So Obi, that's just labeled wrong. It says Pack Creek right now, but that is not that
I
location.
don't know what that is.
So we'll get that fixed.
Honestly, that is more likely a symbology problem by the underlying base map
True.
attribute tables that
True.
they're not in control of.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Tony. We will, we will see what we can do about that. Okay, Obi.
And then the only other thing is, what I did is blow up this map. I'm gonna have trouble now. It looks like you have Pack Creek listed. Oh, is a kind of big stream area there. You see where that is? It's a blue.
Yeah, you mean the blue line that
Yeah,
kind
that
of,
blue
yeah,
line.
I've been wondering about that too,
And-
Thomas.
And it's really nice to have that there, but then I would say, if you really think the river is that important, where's Mill Creek?
Agreed.
It comes in. So it just to treat them equally, if that's
Yeah.
going to be there, you should have Mill Creek coming
Agreed.
down and where it intersects.
So Thomas, Obi is saying that apparently it looks like we're showing Pack Creek as the blue line running through. I'm putting my arrow on it, but hopefully you can see that. But that Mill Creek isn't given the same
It's not
blue
on the
line
map.
designation on the map, and it isn't labeled. So is that something that we can do there?
We can add that, yes. And we understand that Pack Creek certainly is ephemeral in some areas, right? But I appreciate that. We'll fix that and we'll add Mill Creek.
Thank you.
Any other suggestions? So as I understand, it, the motion is that we approve this with these kind of tweaks to the map and stuff. Basically, is that roughly right?
Yeah, my motion stands, inclusive of the discussion that we just had.
So are we ready to vote? All in favor? That's unanimous.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
And you know, if you're looking at it closer, you see anything else, just email me. And we can pass those along to the county commission as well. And thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Great job.
Okay. Boy, I thought the other one would go much faster and this one would take much longer. So wonderful. I'm glad you guys are pleased. Huh?
Sorry, 6-1.
Yeah.
Do we have any future considerations?
No, I will just say just a couple updates. We had a few promising candidates for the associate planner position. So we're hoping to wrap up that process by the end of the week, I hope, and make an offer to someone. They both live out of the area. They are both aware of the situation. So we'll see how that all goes. And then some of you may or may not be aware of the there's an appeal happening on the Cane Creek development, so it's keeping the planning department very busy and not letting us get to some other things. So you may start hearing grumblings from developers, and I've asked the county administration and the attorney's office just to kind of support planning and zoning. If you hear complaints about processing times, there's some things that are really taking up our time, and that includes trying to get this land use chapter adopted, and it includes, you know, all kinds of budgets happening. You know, we've got a lot going on. So I would just say, if you hear rumblings out there about how long things are taking, please just relay to them that we've got budget, we've got land use chapter going, we've got, you know, there's a lot happening. So
Short staff.
So you may hear some rumblings out there. I just wanted to kind of provide some explanation on that. You know, and let them know, you know, we're trying to get some big things done around here, and, you know, we have limited staff. So I would just please ask that you pass that on, and, you know, we're doing the best we can. So, and I think that's it. I'm not thinking that far ahead right now. So I apologize. If you want to support in the budget process, if you want to do a joint planning commission letter to the county commission that just says we support the line item in the budget for doing a complete code revision, I would probably really appreciate that. You never know how things are going to go in the budget. And so I think that would help the county commission know that that's supported by the planning commission as well.
Is that the kind of thing where we could take a vote on a draft letter of support at the next meeting? That would be a quick little action item, but we could do that.
Yeah,
So-
your next meeting is,
ChatGPT.
is there one? Wait a minute, do you guys have another one before December 3rd?
Yeah.
Yeah, so hang on, I'm just looking at the calendar because my brain is lots of places these days. Yeah, so you do have a meeting November 25th. So maybe Obi and I could,
That's right after.
So 2 days before. this.
Okay.
yeah. So maybe Obi, would you be willing to kind of draft a letter of support for that line item, and then we could kind of work on it, and we'll,
I'll get some information.
yeah, that'd be great. And then, yes, we could bring that back the 25th. Whether we have anything else to go on the 25th agenda, I don't know right now. So we may. Oh, so one issue that happened, and Trish might be aware of this. One of the land use code revisions that went through the process recently, specifically for the major utility, ended up when we had an applicant come in and we had to use it to answer their question and we realized it wasn't exactly clear on some things. And so, we sent it out to the county commission noting, okay, here's what I think you meant to pass, but here's what maybe you really wanted it to mean. Oh, I just said that wrong. Here's what passed. But we think you really meant this, right? Because it just wasn't clear, but we think the intention was there of what was really meant. And so after much a discussion, we felt that it actually needed to go back through the public hearing process and be very clear, because it does change what's a minor and what's a major. And Tony's like, yes, I said that. So anyway, so what we might do is try to get that back to you on November 25th, which would mean I would have to notice really soon. Back to you on November 25th, so maybe it could go back to the commission before the end of the year. So we just noticed that, oh, okay, that when you really look at the red line and then you make a clean copy, it's a little unclear. And so that might be something we try to bring back on November 25th, because otherwise I don't think we'd have anything else besides the letter of support. So that might be a good thing if we can, yeah, we can pull that off, I think. So that's all I have.
We have a motion to,
On that
yes, go
future
ahead.
land use code, or future considerations, I know we talked about this and I know you're so busy, but you know, I had said this earlier. When we did the workshops out in Thompson, it would be like if 4,000 people showed up to our workshops, like the whole town was out. And they often feel like we don't care about them and forget about them. And, you know, that was a really cool workshop, because to see so much engagement on that and to kind of like not have that happen, I feel like, I don't know. I just want, maybe sometime we can do the Thompson thing. I think that's important to, like, if they wanted to present any plans to the state for water or whatever, it'd be like, hey, look, you know, here's a city in the desert. All you do have to do is water it. So, you know,
So,
yeah.
yeah, I thank you, Erin. And I know Trish might be a little more involved, but I haven't been completely up to speed on the proposed replat for Thompson, but that's one element that I know that that planning and zoning might be waiting on to, as far as,
Yeah.
because that replat's gonna move some
Okay.
property lines kind of substantially. And so I think kind of waiting for that to get done, and then I agree that we need to get back in there and look at the future land use map for Thompson. And so I don't know where the replat is at. My understanding is that's being funded from the commission budget. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Yeah, so if you wanted an update on that, Erin, you could certainly, email the commissioners and just say, hey, where are we at? Is there a timeline?
Okay.
But when we look at, once we do this future land use map, right, for the Spanish Valley, then we're looking at other future land use maps. So that would be a logical next step, is to do Thompson Springs next. And I think that's a great idea.
On their water, they are doing water feasibility study, and they got a chunk from the county, but a large chunk from like great stuff. Anyways, they have money for that feasibility study. It's like 150. That study existed there. Feasibility of aquifers, which let that one. And then they are trying to get that up to.
That's why I'm like, yeah, hey, get this all ready for them to.
It's actually with some trying to get the water, but it would provide water for Thompson.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, oh, there you go.
So that's all.
Never seen such a pro-development group of people that were just like, oh my God, yeah, that was,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn then.
Move to adjourn.
And seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
That's unanimous.
I did really, I know we just closed, but I did this really quick question. Did y'all, the planning commissioners whose terms are ending in December, did you contact Alicia and just let her know how you wanted to proceed? You don't have to say what it is out loud right now. I just kind of wanted to know. I want to make sure that you did that. Because if we need to advertise for vacant, well, I think we have to advertise anyway, because y'all have to reapply. But